Okay, perfect. And just to, for transparency, we are also trying something new this time, and we are actually live streaming on our Facebook page. So this is exciting, just trying to get all this new technology squared away. But Leaders Labs are generally, 45 to 50 minutes of conversation around a specific topic. We have been doing them for probably about 4 or 5 years now. Some are really, really great. We've had many on toxic workplaces. We've had them on leadership development. And I have had many people say, you do board training, but what do I do if I want to be on a board? And I think David and I had this conversation a couple of weeks ago. So this is very timely, especially as we're going into the new year, about what it really means to be a board member of your local nonprofit. So I want to just kind of have some conversation. I have a bunch of stuff going on my computer, so I hope everything works well. We do have a poll, but if it doesn't work, we could just raise our hands because there's just a few of us. So first of all, I'm Carla. I know all of you here, so I'm really glad. But for those of you who are live streaming with us, I'm Carla Harris. I'm the CEO of the People Institute, and we are just here to have a great conversation and some good dialogue. So you want to serve on a board, and what does that mean? So first of all, start with the facts. Board service is the absolute best way to give back to your community. It is a way to get involved. It's a way to have leadership. It's a way to be accountable to stakeholders for various organizations. If you're passionate about a cause, and get involved. It's also a great stepping stone when you want to move into corporate board. So today we're not talking about corporate board service. And the difference between the two, for those of you who don't know, nonprofit means that it's a volunteer position. For a corporate board, it's a paid position. And it's generally with publicly traded organizations. So today, though, we're focusing on our local nonprofit organizations. So yes, board service is the absolute best way to give back to your service. But there's a lot of things that we don't always think about when we want to give back, and that's what we're going to talk about today. So what does it really mean to serve on a board? What questions do you need to ask? And I want you to understand that it is absolutely, positively not a resume builder, right? Yes, it will help build your resume, but that can't be the number one reason that you are deciding to serve on a board of directors. So the People Institute, who are we? We are a training and development organization, and we really approach our training modules from the human approach. Business cannot happen without the humans that it takes to run the business. So all of our training is human-centered, and we really focus on the development of people. We empower both current and future leaders to be better people and to be better people. So as they're serving others, they really understand the dichotomy and the dynamics of all the people that they're serving. And then we work with organizations to help foster a culture of learning and growth. So I do have a QR code here, but I'm not even going to worry about it. I just want to ask the question, how many of you have served on a board? How many of you have currently served on a board of directors? Okay, so we're about 70, 30, 60, 40. All right, so why? Why did you choose? For those of you who have served on a board, I want to know why you made that decision. And for those of you who've never served on a board, why do you want to? So just unmute yourselves and let's have some conversation. Oh, I raised my own hand. Look at that. So tell me, why would you like to serve on a board, or why did you make the decision? So David, how about you?
Not a problem. I just hit my raise my hand button, so let me lower it. Okay, so I'm gonna say coaxed. I've always had community involvement and in my business, in my heart and all, and where I came from. But the opportunity came around through Raylan Barlow, who was putting together a course or a group where they needed people of color to sit on boards. I realized that that was a weakness and we needed to get more representation. So I raised my hand. I was an experiment that they were trying for their program just to see how many people of color they can get onto these boards where they were literally white males or they didn't have any representation that looked like you and I. So that's how I got started in there. And what I learned, I will share at another time because I don't want to take away from your thunder caller. But definitely, it was an opportunity. I didn't go on with the intent to build my resume. I feel my resume in the community speaks for itself. So that was not it. I really wanted to get involved to see how I can help better either the organization or better my community.
I'm sure, there'll be some areas for you to participate in discussion later. Absolutely. Emma, how about you?
So I haven't served on a board, but my interest in serving on a board is I want to give back, right? And I want to give back by using the skills that I've developed throughout my career and be able to give to public programs, nonprofit organizations that are trying to drive to different places. So I have a ton of business experience, leadership experience, project management experience, and I just think that those skills are important in any organization. And also I think representation matters, right? And so being able to represent at a board level, I think is just a different way of driving diversity and inclusion and being able to kind of, continue to move that narrative forward. In a board setting, I just really feel like that's a place that you could make a difference.
Yeah, absolutely. How about you, Chris?
So for me, I've always wanted to actually create my own nonprofit. And so when I actually started to work with Hands on Broward specifically, it was for me was the wow, I want to see how this works. I want to understand a little bit more about, the structure and how everything rolls behind the scenes, because I hadn't had a chance to opportunity to see all of that. And it just reinforced everything that I was already wanting to do in the community. And I'm just looking forward to continuing that process and that journey. And so I really like being on the board because of that reason.
Abigail, any thoughts from you?
Yes, I'm kind of muting myself because I've got a daycare back here, a lot of kids making noise. I will piggyback off of Chris. I know I met you in DC and working with Operation Hope. I've worked with several nonprofits, including my church, and I wanted to start my own. So I wanted to see, what do I need to know that I didn't know before? So that was my purpose on coming on your podcast. Thank you.
Good.
And good to see you.
Yes. I wish I could see your face. And also, I just want to.
Well, I'm not dressed.
That's okay.
10 o'clock here in California. I'm not dressed.
Introduce Desiree Zambrano. She's our assistant, so she's just hanging out with us today. So, hey, Desiree.
Hi, nice to meet you all.
So yes, all of those are really great reasons to want to serve on a board, and that should be always at the back of your mind. Your why should always be at the back of your mind. So let's think about board service 101, right? So there are three what I call big buckets that we should think of that make up any organization from a nonprofit board member perspective, and that is leadership, fiduciary, and governance. So when we think about those three areas, we look at what they mean. So leadership, it is the strategic vision and executive oversight and organizational culture of an organization. So when we talk about leadership from a board, there are two ways to look at it. The first is, are you a working board? So a working board is where there is no staff, there's no executive director, there may be a part-time administrator or a contracted administrator, but the board members actually do the work. Then there's, so when you talk about leadership or executive oversight, when you're a working board, think of it as the board itself being the executive director, quote unquote, of the organization. Decision-making is done. The treasurer is the one who handles whatever the payments are, the financial things. They might outsource things to contractors such as accounting firms and things like that. But executive oversight really is, from a board position, is when you're overseeing the executive of the operational part of the organization. So whether it's an executive director or a CEO, that's the leadership or the executive oversight from leadership. Now, where it gets muddy is when you have board members wanting to run the organization when there is a staff in place, and that is completely not acceptable because it opens you up to even more liability if you overstep and don't allow the executive director or the CEO to do the operational day-to-day duties that it takes to run the organization. So you want to just be careful about that. Again, when we're talking about organizational culture, when you have a staff or an executive director or CEO or leadership team that's running the operations, they're helping develop the culture of the organization, just like in any for-profit, nonprofit organization. You know that there's a workplace culture. The vision and the mission of the organization starts at the board level and then filters down into the staff and then into the community. And that's how you help dictate the culture of the organization. So bucket number one is leadership, providing strategic vision. Where's the organization going and how is it going to get there? Executive oversight, and then helping to define the organizational culture. The second bucket is fiduciary. So this one is really, you have to be careful when you're thinking about this, because board members can be liable. There can be personal liability, because you have the legal right and responsibility of that organization to make sure that all the I's are dotted and all the T's are crossed, right? So there's financial oversight. Board members have a duty to diligently oversee the organization's financial matters. Board members, the chairman of the board or the treasurer of the board signs off on the tax returns. But all board members should be reviewing the tax returns, because if it bounces back to the board, it's not just the treasurer or the chairman that's in trouble. It's everybody, because everybody had to vote yay or nay to make sure this was approved. So make sure that you're reviewing those tax returns, asking questions where you have questions. And if something doesn't look right, it's that old adage, if you see something, say something, because you're the one in the hot seat and you want to make sure that you're covered. Transparency in reporting. Again, reports come through, there are monthly reports, there are financial reports, there are P&L statements, there are statements of financial position when you're using nonprofit, the accounting services for nonprofits. So you want to make sure that you read those reports, look at bank statements, make sure that there's accountability, that there's checks and balances, especially if you're providing executive oversight for the organization that has a staff. And then finally, fiduciary is legal compliance. Board members must understand and ensure that whatever the organization's rules and regulations are, that they're in compliance with your state regulations. So it all comes down to what's required. So for example, here in Florida, the minimum requirement in Florida is 3 people on a board of directors for a nonprofit. And every state has its own rules. What changes that minimum are your bylaws. Your bylaws could say that there has to be a minimum of 5 people in order for the organization to be considered a viable nonprofit. Whatever is in the bylaws supersedes what's at the state level, what the state requirements are, unless you decide to make them match. So for example, if you lose 5 of your board members and you have 8 board members, Now you have 3. While yes, you have met here in the state of Florida, you've met the requirement for the state, but you have not met the requirements for your bylaws, which are the legal operating documents for your organization. So you have to make sure that you're in compliance. And then the third and final bucket is the governance bucket. And this is policy development and oversight. We go back again to accountability and transparency and strategic decision-making. So policy development and oversight is the establishment of policies and procedures that guide the operations of the organization. These are your bylaws. It's like for for-profit organizations, it could be your articles of incorporation. It could be your operating agreement if you're an LLC. So it's really about understanding what and how to put in place what those policies are. And your bylaws are a written document that's publicly available. So a person off the street can say, you know what, you guys didn't vote right, and that's what it says in the bylaws, and they would be absolutely correct. So you have to make sure that you adhere to what your bylaws say. And when in meetings, when in doubt, go back and say, what does it say in the bylaws? Because those are your governing documents for the organization. Accountability and transparency. So governance ensures that the organization is accountable to its stakeholders. Who are the stakeholders? Where do you get your money? Who do you serve? Are there members? Those are your stakeholders. Members, if you're a membership organization. The community, if you're a community-based organization. If you get government money, then they're your funders. If you get foundation money, all of those people are your stakeholders. So you have to make sure that you are transparent with them so that they can come. All nonprofits are public organizations. So you can go to GuideStar if you're considering sitting on a board. You can go to GuideStar, you can look at their 990s, and you can see where their money goes. So it's really important, and it's up to you as a potential or current board member to make sure that you cover yourself. And then finally, governance is around the strategic decision-making. And this is making critical decisions to help advance the organization. And you can see that some of it may spill over into leadership, but it's all about making sure the vision of the organization is moving in the right direction. So we talked a little bit about 501. So there are quite a few 501 organizations, and that's what sets you apart. It's an IRS designation. There are quite a few of them, but I'm going to talk about 4 of the more popular ones. So there's 501c3, which everyone knows about. Organizations, some actually misclassify themselves. They call themselves a 501c3, or we use the term interchangeably, and it really is not an interchangeable term as it relates to the IRS designations. So there's 501c3, there's a C4, C6, and C7. Those are the ones that we're going to talk about. There are probably about 13 or 14 altogether, but the most common ones are the ones that we're going to learn about today. So 501c3 is the most common. Generally, you have churches, educational organizations, religious organizations, literary organizations. Donations are generally tax deductible from your donors. So a 501c3 is the most common of the designations. And most people say everything is a 501c3 when really it is not. It really determines on who you serve. The next one is 501c4, and these are your social welfare organizations. These are organizations that promote social welfare and community involvement. Generally, donations are not tax deductible. And again, I want to just clarify 2 things, disclaimers. 1, I'm not an attorney, and 2, I am not an accountant. So make sure that you really have conversations with those professionals if you're setting up a 501 to make sure you're getting the right designation so that you are not punished with penalties from Internal Revenue. 501c6 are your business and professional associations. So generally, these are your membership associations, trade associations, your chambers. And here you'll see that when you go to an organization, say you register for an organization, and little tiny fine print says deductible as allowable by law. So you just need to give that receipt to your tax professional and let them figure out. So the thing that makes it tax deductible, again, I have my little asterisk, is that you can't receive something in return. So if you're going to a networking dinner and let's just say your ticket is $65, the value of the networking dinner is not covered. What's covered is the part over and above it. So you just have to make sure you always check with your tax professional. And then finally, there is a 501c7. And those are your social and recreational clubs. They're generally membership based. They focus on social and recreational activities. There can be some lobbying activity. So if you back up to 501c3, there's no ability to lobby. If you have a 501c3, you can get in some trouble with that. So just make sure you don't do that. So determining when you are a new board member, or if you're interested in becoming a board member, look up the kind of organization they are to make sure that they're properly designating themselves so that they don't get in trouble with the Internal Revenue. So board member expectations. Are there any? Absolutely, of course. There are some that organizations have from you, and there are some that you have a right to have for the organizations. But let's talk about these four. One, you're expected to attend all and participate in all the organizational activities. Are there fundraisers? Are there events? Are there meetings? Are there activities outside of the traditional meeting calendar? And then, of course, there are board meetings, there are committee meetings. There might be initiatives that the organization is a part of. As a board member, those are the organizational requirements that you have for attendance. And then stay abreast of what's happening. Stay informed about the organization's activity. So let's just say, for example, you're a member of a sorority or a fraternity. Your staying informed, or not just what's happening during the board meetings, but also listen to your members, listen to your fraternity and sorority sisters and brothers, hear what the word is on the ground, because that's what can help you bring information back to the board meetings to help them make decisions that really will impact the organization. Advocate for the organization's mission. So if you work for an organization and let's say their cause is foster children or human trafficking, make sure that you're advocating and that you're in agreement with what it is that the organization's mission is, because that's what you're there for. And then finally, providing financial support or assistance in fundraising efforts. So we're definitely going to, there is definitely a financial requirement and obligation. It's just what does it look like? Is it a give or get policy? Is it a where you're expected to buy a table at every event? Are you expected to bring sponsors in, or any of those things? So based on a few of these expectations, for those of you who are currently or have served on board members, on boards, where have you found the most challenging of these expectations? Chris? Nope.
The reason I'm shaking my head is I'm still fairly new,
Okay.
but I am trying to I'm trying to assist in a lot of different ways. So like wherever I can, I'm always there and trying to make sure that I'm a part of as much things as I can. The other problem is I can't be at everything because, we have other things. So that's, and especially, if you're serving on multiple boards, you can't do everything. And that's a whole nother component, I think. So.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Abigail?
I was thinking about what you said about the challenge as well. And
Mhm.
one of my challenges is when you deal with new um nonprofits. Their bylaws, they don't really adhere to them, and they don't really have a plan. And then when you serve on the boards that have been established, they have certain people that do certain things, and you're just kind of like a figurehead. So it's kind of like trying to navigate between the two. I get what you're saying. I agree completely, but that's been my challenge.
Okay. So we're going to go into a couple of the questions to ask a little bit down the road, but you're absolutely right. One is if time commitment is a big issue, right? So how do you attend? Most people who serve on board, serve on multiple boards. My personal rule is that I don't serve on more than 2 boards at a time because I run a business. I make sure, I have a family, and I don't want to be working 24 hours a day. And in there somewhere, I have to have some me time. So that's my personal rule. But I learned that lesson the hard way. And that is because when I first started my business and I started developing my board relationships, I think at most, I probably sat on 3 boards at one time. So what happened is you get burnt out, and when you're burned out, you're no good to anybody. So just make sure that you think about those things. And then to your point, Abigail, your bylaws, the bylaws of an organization are paramount. They are like the instruction booklet. And because they are a legal operating document for the organization, you really have to make sure that voting and decision-making and the fiduciary requirements are outlined in the bylaws and that they're adhered to, because if not, you could get in trouble. And we definitely do not want organizations to get in trouble. So thanks for sharing. So when we think about benefits, there are absolute benefits to board service. And the benefits are personal fulfillment, which is a little bit of what I think Abigail was talking about. You have a smaller organization, you want to get involved, you want to contribute to a cause, and you want to feel good about it. And that's great. But you have to make sure that you're there for the right reason. And giving back is wonderful, but there is a time requirement that must be adhered to. There's also a professional development benefit, and this is gaining leadership and governance skills. So even if you're a director at large, you're still a leader. You walk into an organization, to an event that the organization has put on, you have your badge on, your badge says board member, and what happens? Everybody starts coming to you and asking questions because you're a leader, and they see you, they view you as a leader within that organization. So that means you must have all the answers to all the questions. But it helps you in developing your skills as a leader. There are obviously networking opportunities. So really being able to build valuable connections and then making a positive impact. You're there because you want to be there and you want to get move and help the organization for whatever the cause is that's near and dear to your heart. So yes, there are some benefits. So now let's get to the nitty-gritty stuff, right? I want you to stop and I want you to think about some things. All of this stuff sounds great. All of this stuff sounds like you are, all of this stuff sounds like you should know exactly what you're doing and all of that kind of stuff. But then what happens? What do you need to know before you say yes? So these are some things that I want you to think about. One, what is the time commitment? You have to know the time commitment, the requirement that's there, right? It can be time consuming, and you have to make sure that you have the right amount of time to commit to the organization. What is the financial responsibility? Is it a give or get policy? And give or get is when you're either required to give a certain amount of money or you get a certain amount of money. So it could be with small nonprofits, it could be $500 for each board member. For larger nonprofits, it could be $10,000. So that's $10,000 annually that you either have to bring in or you give it yourself. And you have to make sure that you understand all of that before you say yes to being on the board. Fundraising expectations. Organizations, generally, the give or get policy will help with the fundraising responsibilities, but in some organizations, it does not. And even so, if you have your give or get, so let's say your give or get is $2,500 for the year, there's also a requirement to bring in sponsors. There's also a requirement to buy tables. So you think about all of the financial commitment that you have to endure when you become a board member. So those are things that you really want to think about. Conflict and challenges. Are there any internal conflicts? Is there any infighting on the board? Is the organization struggling? Are they short on staff? All of those things are questions that you should ask. And then finally, really understanding the legal responsibility you have as a board member for that organization. So that leads us to questions to ask. What questions do you need to ask when it comes to saying, yes, I want to serve on your board? So this is just an abbreviated list, and I know that you have some as well, the things that you might want to ask. The first one, how much time is required? So I have served on 7 boards in my professional career. The very, very first board that I served on was a quasi-government private organization. There was a 35-member board, 35 members. I had no idea what I was doing. It was my first time. It was an opportunity. My business was probably about 5 or 6 years old at the time. And I was passionate about it. And I got the invitation from the executive director and I said yes. I had no idea. I wish I had seen this before I said yes to that. So the board meetings were an average of 2 hours a month. I also chaired and served on committees. Each committee meeting was monthly, which was about 2 hours. So now we're at 4 hours a month. And the average time was 2 to 4 hours to read all the information to prepare for the board meeting, right? Because how are you going to have intelligent conversation about motions and business that's being handled at the board level if you don't read the information? And you are still responsible for the actions of the board, even if you didn't read the information. So you have to read the information. So how much time is required? So you need to not only think about the time of the board meetings, but all the other ancillary time that goes along with that. Is there a give or get policy and what is it? So we talked a bit about that. How much is it? When do you have to give it? Some board members, some boards require that as soon as you accept and as soon as you're nominated on the board, you have to bring a check right with you. So you have to make sure, is it where you have to give the money right up front? Or do you do it over time? Or is there a fiscal period that you have to be responsible for giving the money? That's a great question. What is the onboarding process? I think David and I talked about this a couple weeks ago. What is there an onboarding process? Do they even have one? I remember I've been on boards where I was on board. I was newly elected to the board. I was the director at large, and it was like, poof, there you go. Do whatever it is. You'll fit in where you fit in and figure it out. And then there are other organizations that have processes where you go through leadership training. You work with other you work with other board members to learn what's happening during the actual what the process is for onboarding. Are there any committees and what are those committees? So you need to find out what your requirements are for serving on a committee. And then what are my expectations? So this is twofold. The first is, what are your expectations as a board member of yourself? Why are you there? What do you want to get from this experience? And then secondly, what are the expectations of the board members and the leadership of their board members? So you have to ask that question, what are the expectations? How diverse is the board? So take a look around. In this day and age of diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, many organizations are struggling to find people of color to serve on the board. So what I will say to you about that is that's a bunch of crap. There are organizations that really want to be, there are people who really want to serve on the boards, and they're just not passed, right? So we also need to make sure, though, that when it comes to adding people of color on the board, that the boards are not practicing tokenism. You're getting someone on the board simply because they're a person of color versus what they can bring to the table. So finding out how diverse the board is really, really important, is if diversity is important to you. Is there a mentoring program? Is a great question to ask. A lot of the larger boards have mentoring programs where your more seasoned board members will mentor incoming board members for a period of 3 or 6 months to make sure that they kind of get the lay of the land. It should be a formal process, because what happens is, if it's not a formal process, you could get weighed or bogged down by people who only want to give you the gossip versus really helping you be a great board member and serving. Find out how long your term is. So a great organization should have term limits. Term limits could be 1 year, 2 years, 3 years. And then there's a maximum term limit. So a maximum term limit could be 6 years. So for example, let's say you serving as a 2-year term, but there's a maximum term limit of 6 years. That means you can only serve 2 terms unless you're elected to the executive committee. So maybe now you've become the president-elect or the chair-elect or treasurer. So those positions have separate term limits on their own. So those would then add on to your term limit as a board, as a director at large. And just for clarification, executive committee are your chair-elect, if there's one, your immediate past chair, treasurer, and secretary. Every other position would be considered a director at large. And even your committee chairs, they're still directors at large, even though they have a title. Term limits are really important, and you really want an organization that has term limits, because term limits help keep the information fresh, help keep the innovation there, your creativity. What happens is, we can see in the lovely, lovely world of politics, that when people serve indefinitely, policies don't change because people are comfortable with the status quo. So you must make sure, and it's always beneficial to have people who are, terming in and out, which keeps the information fresh. And then finally, what is going on within the organization? So ask, what's happening? What's happening with the organization? Are they hiring? What does the budget look like? How is the budget used? How is it allocated? Where does the money go? What percentage of the money goes to programs, back to the community? If only 10% goes back to the community, folks, I'm going to tell you, run for the hills, because that means that the money is going to the overhead and not the community, and that's not really what you're there for. But it's a good sense to see that probably the administrative cap is somewhere 15-20% with 80 to 85% going into programs, which is a really great way for a board to operate. So what are some of the other questions that you think you would want to know if you're considering serving on a board? So just unmute and let me know what you're thinking.
So I actually have a question specifically at what you just specifically talked about. So how do you designate the 80 to 85% with a program, depending on if it's like services? Is that just like what is being done into the community? It's not necessarily the salary of the individuals in the organization. Is that correct?
Yes. So your administrative costs are going to be all your operational costs to include salaries. So for example, let's just use round numbers. So $100,000 is the operating budget, we'll say. 80% of that, so $80,000 should go into programming, whatever the programming is. So it could be feeding the homeless, if that's your mission. It could be providing after-school programming for kids if you're in foster care. So the other $20,000 or 20% should go to your whatever your administrative costs are. So you really have to look at where your money's going. It can fluctuate a little bit, but most organizations, the majority of their money should go to programming. Now, when you look at funding, organizations that are funded by, let's say, local government dollars, there's a percentage, it tells you in the funding opportunity what your administrative costs cannot exceed. So generally it's 10% of whatever you're asking for. So if you're asking for $100,000 from that particular funder, then, and it's a $20,000, I mean a 20% cap, so $20,000 is all you can use for your administrative costs, which includes your overhead. So then that means that as a nonprofit, you have to make sure that all your money is not coming just from one area. It's not meant, funders aren't generally giving you money as a startup. So you have to figure out many ways to raise money. Does that make sense, Chris?
I think that helps.
Okay. So Emma, you had a question?
Yes, so I had a few questions. I'm not sure if it's your questions on your questions to ask slide.
You can ask
But
lots of questions.
so is there traditionally like a standard interview process when it comes to board selection? Like is it like a traditional interview process, or do you find that it's basically connections and people getting connected and people being introduced?
It depends on the organization. So
Okay.
the larger the organization, the more formal the process could be. So it could be that you're introduced to the organization because of networking contacts, but there's still an application process. So we work with boards on building blind recruitment processes because we want organizations to be more diverse. And the best way to do that is to create a blind application process. Excuse me. So what we recommend is that boards do that. It doesn't matter how you got the information that the board is looking. You're still going through the process because we want the process to be fair. So that's that question. What else?
And then,
I see your hand, Deborah. I'll get to you in 1 second. Go ahead.
I have two more questions. So can you establish your term? And I know like the smaller boards don't have a term, but can you ask and say, I'm willing to commit to a 2-year term or 1-year term? Is that like acceptable?
If bylaw, so first of all, every nonprofit organization is required to have bylaws. You can't, it's like your operating documents. You can't even set it up with the IRS without having bylaws. So in your bylaws should dictate what your term limits are. if they dictate what your term limits are, I mean, obviously, it's just like a job, right? You can go on and you can say, oh, yeah, this is my career of choice. I want to be here forever, and then quit. And you can quit in the middle of a term, but it really is understanding what that requirement is. And then you go in with your eyes wide open to make sure. So if the organization does not have terms, then of course you can say, I'm willing to be here for a year. But generally, you can't get a lot done in a year. So most organizations have a minimum of 2 year, have at least 2 year terms. I've not been on a board where it's been less than a 2 year term, unless the organization is just starting. So if the organization is just starting, then you can draw straws, and you can do a 1, 2, 3 year term so that they're staggered, because you don't want all your board members leaving at the same time. And then that's what starts your term process. So it depends on what, but the bylaws will tell you what the term limits are.
Okay, then my last question is, are there limitations on what boards you can sit on? And I say that in that, let's say that my specialty is project management, but I can potentially be serving on boards of like competitors. Let's just say, right? Is that do you find that organizations add that as part of their stipulations? Like you can't be also sitting on a board of a competitor. I just want to get some insight into that.
So I think that would come if you're working for an organization. That's going to generally be a rule by the organization. Now, I'm sure if you are let's just use public boards for a second. If you're working for Coke, they're definitely not going to want you to sit on a Pepsi board.
Right.
But every organization is required legally to have a conflict of interest form for all board members. So if there is a conflict of interest, whether it's money, I mean, if you have a service to provide, then you have to talk about that in the form that you're filling out so that everything's clear. Some boards you can get funding from the organization and still be a board member, but if your contract comes up for voting, then you have to recuse yourself and leave the room during the voting process. So but there are conflict rules that apply.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Deborah, how are you?
I am well, and thank you for taking my question. My question has to do with when most of the administrative staff, as you want to call it, are volunteers, where we have not gotten to a point yet to generate enough funding to actually staff an office. So those people are using that as service hours and things like that. Do you have any suggestions about how we can better capture the hours and the monetary value of volunteers who work in an organization?
So are the volunteers the board members, or are these volunteers that are helping do the work?
Both.
Okay, so earlier in the call, we talked about what's called a working board. So a working board is a board of directors when there's no staff. So they're actually running the organization. Those you could probably, I mean, that's generally kind of your CEO position or your executive leadership position for an organization where there's no staff or no executive director. Those hours are, you can sort of equate what you would for a salary, if you will, if that's what you're looking for. For your volunteers, there are platforms that you can use, like technological platforms for signing in, signing out, doing those activities. And that would then give a printout for someone who needs, especially for students, who need to document their volunteer hours. If the organization doesn't have it in the budget to buy a software to do that, then, and there are some free softwares out there. I'd have to do a little bit of research on what they are, but there are softwares out there that can track the time so that people can sign in, and that way you can get a printout. Otherwise, I mean, you could probably go old school and do like an Excel spreadsheet or something like that. Does that help?
Yes, thank you, because we're just not doing a good job of it, I guess. And we don't have any software at this time to, actually keep up. But a lot of the grants and things do count those hours, and we're just not able to capture them at the level that I think we should. So
Yeah,
thank you.
absolutely. So what to look for when you are considering a board service? So of course, it has to align with your own personal passion. It has to be in line with your core values. That's why it's so important for you to consider what is happening internally with the organization. Review their bylaws. Bylaws are accessible documents. They should be, excuse me, they should be on the website that you could just download and take a look. Also, you can look at their 990s. If you go to GuideStar, which I think is now called candid.org, you can review their bylaws, their tax returns. Depending on how quickly they upload them will tell you how current they are, but they are public documents that you're able to go in and take a review of. Look at the board diversity. How diverse is the organization? And if diversity is important to you, and you are the diverse person on the board, and as we all know, that can go both ways. If that's important, make sure it's not simply a checking of the box. And the diversity should be all types of diversity. So not just your racial diversity, but there should be representation of, your LGBTQ community, your physically abled or disabled people on your board. If you are serving a community where you don't have stakeholders on the board, you should. So for example, if you're sitting on a board that is serving foster care families, then there should be a former foster care child on the board. A foster care parent should be on the board, because that's what gives you that really organic information to send back and to prepare programming around servicing the community that you're serving. What is the community impact? Are you really making a difference, or is the organization really making a difference in the community that they're serving? Is it a government or non-governmental organization? So government organization is an organization that is it's similar to the board that I sat on. My very first board was a workforce board. It was here in South Florida. I served on that board for 5 years, and 50% of the seats were appointed positions and required by the federal government. And the other 50% were elected people from the community, and they still had to be in a certain category. So for those non-appointed positions, there had to be a number of small businesses, a number of mid-sized, a number of educational institutions that make up the board. That was what was required from the government perspective. And then you have your private nonprofits or your non-governmental organizations, and those are private nonprofits that aren't regulated by a government entity. And you want to determine what the differences are and how they are adhering to those. But either way, as a nonprofit, they still have to have bylaws and things of the sort. Look at the networking opportunities, because let's face it, folks, we're here to network and grow our relationships. It just can't be the number one reason that we're doing this. And then what are the support and resources? If the organization has a staff, then how well sourced is the staff? Do they have great leadership? Do they have enough staff to get the job done? If it's a working board, is there money in the budget to hire a consultant that can help with the administrative duties? So while you may not have a budget to bring on a full-time CEO or executive director or a team, perhaps there's enough money to contract with a consultant who can provide you the administrative duties. Because I will tell you, I've served on both types of boards where I've been a working board and I've been on a working board and I've been on a board that's been very well staffed. And it really makes a huge, huge, huge difference. And that is when you have a well-oiled machine from a board that's staffed, all you have to do is make sure you read your reports, you read the committee reports, and you show up. They schedule it, they do everything else for you, they give you the data, they create all the pretty reports, you just have to make sure you read them. Whereas if you're a working board, you have to do all of those things yourself, so you have to just make sure that the board has the right resources and the support. When it comes to time commitment, working board versus staffed organization is a huge game changer. If you are a working board and you don't have the time to commit, then I would suggest that you not choose a working board, because it's not just about showing up. You know, you think about the old adage, 20% of the people do 80% of the work. When you're on a working board, that really shows, and it can be very, very disheartening, especially when you're looking around the table at other board members and you know that Bob around the corner only shows up at board meetings. He doesn't do anything else and you're doing all the work. So you just have to make sure that you have equal balance. So before I go into what's next, I want to make sure that we all introduce ourselves here. So can we just do a really quick introduction of who's on the call? So I'm going to go just right around. So just your name and your organization. And I just want to thank you for being here. So Chris, how about we start with you?
Awesome. Thank you. Chris Baker, Visuals by Momo. We create documentaries and tell people stories through video. So we help local nonprofits as well as organizations and businesses in the local area become more known through their why and the reason that they've actually created their business or organization. So we actually capture that on video and give back. So thank you.
Emma?
Good afternoon or good morning, everyone, depending on what time zone you're in. My name is Emma Howard. I'm the Vice President of Specialty Business Integration at Evolent. Evolent is a managed care company, and we essentially provide utilization management services for primarily like Medicare and Medicaid.
Perfect. Thank you. David?
Good afternoon or good morning, wherever you are. Just take on from Emma's state. My name is David Reese. I work for a company called Land Infotech. We are an IT managed service provider. What does that mean? That means I protect your computers from our hackers. We do that mainly focused on the nonprofits and for-profit businesses, but a strong understanding of the nonprofits. So again, David Reese, Land Infotech.
Thank you. Abigail?
Good morning. It is almost 11 o'clock here in sunny California. And my name is Abigail Pennington. I work with small businesses. The name of my business is Message Believers Business Support. I work to help small businesses to get established. I help them to put together bylaws, like what they have to do for nonprofits. I help them to create processes and procedures and business plan, 5-year strategic plan, just to get them up and running. I started working with entrepreneurs, but now I'm working with more established business that have been in the marketplace for more than 2 years, that they kind of have a clear vision of where they want to go, because my job is to get them clarity, get them focused, get them going in one direction instead of multiples. So that's what I do.
Excellent. Thank you. Deborah?
Good morning, everyone. I am the founder and operator of Deborah K. Thompson Consultants, and I do definitely work with small businesses and entrepreneurs. So I feel you, Abigail. The most of the work that I do, though, is in and around nonprofits, and I work with and I've done that with several nonprofits here locally in Jacksonville, Florida, and throughout the country with neighborhood associations as they are forming to get federal funds for their operations and programs. But right now, I am the first vice president of the NAACP local branch here in Jacksonville. And we work with mostly volunteers, and that was why the question came. And a lot of the monies that we do get, we do put it all into programming or servicing through our committees. Our work is done through the various committees, and we have 24 standing committees, 9 of which are active here. So environmental and climate control is the one that I work with, and just looking at how we can shore that system up and get more neighborhood and underserved communities involved.
Perfect, thank you. So thank you all for being here. So what's our next step? So first of all, this is a Leaders Lab. I would love, love, love to work with all of you and your organizations. We do coaching for members of new board members. We do board retreats, board development, and leadership training for board members. So the QR code that you see here is directly to my calendar. So if you would like to have some conversation about our services here at the People Institute, just click that and it'll take you right to our calendar, and you can just block out 30-45 minutes and we can have a quick discovery call. And then the next one, so I'm going to leave that up for 10 seconds and just say thank you again for being here. But our next one is a QR code for our survey. I really want your feedback. We love getting your feedback, and it helps us to refine the topics and the things that we talk about here for the Leaders Lab. So that code will take you directly to the survey, and if you can fill that out for us, we would be most appreciative of that. So then I will say again, thank you for joining us. That's our contact information. We have 3 websites that are a part of our company. The first is our main website, which is instituteforpeople.com, which is our main People Institute website. We also have the Diversity Challenge, which is diversitycorporatechallenge.com. And then I'm so excited that we have the Gathering of Women. It's a retreat for all badass women in the world in March taking place, and that is bossbadassery.com. So again, thank you all so much for being here. I really appreciate your time, appreciate your input and your discussion. So until next time, join us for the next Leaders Lab. Talk to you soon. Bye, everybody.
Bye, enjoyed you. Thanks, Paula.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much. All right, bye-bye. Well.